Adolf Hitler sits in his Berlin bunker, shaking uncontrollably in fear. From the other side of the reinforced door, he hears the screams of his soldiers as they're gunned down by the bloodthirsty Soviet forces that have taken over the city. There is no way out, and he's unable to take his own life as his cyanide capsules and firearm were mistakenly left in the main room of the bunker when he was rushed into the safe room. Hitler notices that the battle beyond the reinforced steel hatch has gone eerily quiet. He puts his ear up to the cool metal and listens. He can just make out a series of voices that appear to be speaking Russian. As he listens more closely, he hears a ticking sound. It's as if there's a clock ticking down to something on the other side of the door. His eyes open wide. He dives to the far side of the room and seeks cover. A moment later, there's an explosion. The door lets out a groan as it falls to the floor with a thud. The dust and smoke settle. Dozens of armed Soviet soldiers enter the chamber. They find Adolf Hitler cowering on the floor in the fetal position. They have successfully captured the monster who's caused so much pain and death across the world. The question is, what to do with him now? There are 3 different scenarios that might have unfolded if Hitler was captured during World War II, based on when this event occurred. It's important to note that there is no way of actually knowing what would happen if the Allies had captured Hitler, but based on historical documents and statements by the leaders at the time, we can make some educated guesses. Scenario 1. What if Hitler was captured by Allied forces toward the end of World War II? Adolf Hitler is now in the hands of the Soviet forces. Over the past several months, they've fought a brutal campaign to push Nazi forces out of their homeland and have now taken the fight to Germany. They ravished the countryside as they slowly made their way to Berlin. Entire towns were burnt to the ground. Naval facilities were pillaged and airfields were confiscated. But it is the stories of what the Red Army does to German citizens and Nazi sympathizers that instills fear in the region. After the siege of their homeland, the Soviets are taking no prisoners, and torture is a common occurrence. As this was happening, Hitler couldn't believe what his generals were telling him. His forces were being defeated on all fronts. Seems there was no longer any hope of turning the war around, but he ordered his men to continue fighting anyway. He would rather sacrifice every Aryan in Germany than willingly surrender to Allied forces. From his bunker, Hitler worked with his advisors to find a way out of their predicament, but as the Soviets crashed through their defenses, Hitler considered Plan B, taking his own life. Due to a series of unfortunate circumstances, Adolf Hitler is now in the hands of the Red Army soldiers. He's dragged from the bunker and greeted by thousands of cheering Soviets. They hurl curses at the monster who started World War II, as his actions led to the deaths of millions. Soldiers spit on the former Führer as he walks by. These men have seen the worst of the worst and now they want revenge. As Nazi forces pushed into the Soviet Union in June 1941, they committed countless atrocities. The Soviets fought back but lost more men than any other country during World War II. Soviet lands were soaked with blood, and its soldiers hate Adolf Hitler with a fiery passion. The leader of the Nazis is marched to an open square where he's forced to his knees. The Soviet men sing the songs of their nation as they look on at the scene unfolding before them. Joseph Stalin gave clear instructions to his men that if they captured Hitler, he was to be sent back to Moscow to be tried for his crimes. But this is not what happens. Filled with rage, the soldiers can't control themselves. Adolf Hitler begs for mercy in the city square as Soviet voices echo off the rubble and crumbling buildings that surround them. One of the soldiers who pulled Hitler out of the bunker steps out of the masses and silently walks up to him. He looks Adolf Hitler in the eyes and then says something in broken German. "This is for my fallen comrades," the Soviet soldier says. He pulls his pistol from the side holster, pulls the hammer back, and shoots Adolf Hitler in the head, instantly killing him. There's a roar of approval from the crowd. They will all be reprimanded by Stalin, but the soldiers will stand together in what they did. The demon that was Adolf Hitler was too dangerous to be kept alive, and deserved what he got. Other members of the Red Army walk up to Hitler's body and fire a round into it. By the end of the day, there is very little left to recover and dispose of. There's a chance in this scenario that the Soviet soldiers would have brought Hitler to their commanding officers, who might have been able to show a little more restraint. In this case, Adolf Hitler's placed in restraints and hidden on board a transport bound for the Soviet Union. His location is kept a secret as the Soviets don't want the Nazi forces trying to rescue their leader. Once in Moscow, Hitler is brought before Joseph Stalin, who looks upon him with contempt. The German Führer is thrown into a heavily guarded jail cell to await trial for his war crimes. Now that he's safely secured in prison, footage of his capture and incarceration is sent out to news companies across the world. Every paper is given images taken by Soviet photographers, and every media outlet in the world now has video footage of the daring capture and extraction of the Nazi barbarian. These films are broadcast worldwide, so everyone on the planet can watch the capture of Adolf Hitler. Weeks later, Hitler is marched through Moscow as the Soviet people shout insults and throw rotten food at him. He's led past Lenin's tomb and into the Kremlin, where he will stand trial. The war has now reached its end as Nazi Germany crumbled without leadership of their Führer. Once he was captured, other Nazi leaders began to surrender, as it was now clear the war had been lost. There are still groups of Nazi youth and soldiers fighting in more remote areas, but between the Allied forces pushing across Europe on the Western Front and the Soviets controlling much of the eastern portion of the continent, the war in Europe is all but over. Allied leaders meet during this time to decide exactly what to do with Adolf Hitler. It's decided that he must stand trial, but his fate has already been sealed. The trial lasts for months as witness after witness is called to the stand to testify against the Nazi war criminal. He's held personally responsible for the mass genocide of the Jewish people, along with countless other crimes against humanity. At the conclusion of the trial, Hitler is found guilty. He's placed in chains and led to the Red Square, where millions of people watch him walk up the gallows. Hitler ascends the steps to the noose that slowly sways back and forth in the frigid Russian air. The rope is placed around his neck. Stalin says a few words and the trapdoor is released. Hitler struggles against the tightened rope, but he doesn't last very long. After a couple minutes, his body stops twitching and the war criminal's lifeless corpse sways from side to side. As the Russian people cheer so loudly, their voices can be heard from miles away. Before we explore this next scenario, which is much more terrifying, we want to examine one other alternate scenario that might have played out if Hitler was captured at the end of World War II. This is not for the faint of heart, as it may give you nightmares. Hitler is captured by the Soviets and stands trial in Moscow. This is unfortunately giving him a chance to defend himself and a platform to spread his venomous hate of the Jewish people. As he explains what he did and why he did it, he appeals to some of the Russian people. He uses the trial not to try to defend what he did, but to justify it. Many don't give his words any credence, however his rhetoric speaks to a small number of Russian nationalists. In fact, even though Adolf Hitler is the reason so many of their fellow countrymen died, they now need someone new to blame for the state of their nation and to fight against. These extremists listen to Hitler's message and become even more radicalized. They band together with the Russian Liberation Army and start a larger Nazi movement in the Soviet Union. Allied leaders were always afraid that giving Hitler a platform to speak and defend himself was a mistake, but they never thought it could go this far. Uprisings begin forming across the Soviet Union. The country falls into chaos. In the turmoil that's unfolding, Adolf Hitler is broken out of prison by extremists. He's smuggled out of the country and joins other Nazi war criminals who've escaped Allied forces and now reside in South America. A new Nazi nation is secretly being built on the continent. With their leader freed from capture, the Nazis begin building a new army in the heart of South America. Hitler's time in captivity has only made him crazier and more bloodthirsty. He writes a sequel to Mein Kampf about his time in the Soviet prison. From it comes a new agenda. Adolf Hitler no longer wants to wage a racial war in just Europe but across the entire world. He will crush every democratic and communist country on the planet. No one will be spared except for his Nazi brethren. Adolf Hitler calls on all of his old and new allies to join him in South America. From there, he launches a savage campaign into North America, and World War III begins. This is an extreme scenario, but one that might have come out of a very real fear that many Allied leaders had about giving Hitler a chance to defend himself at trial. Scenario 2. What if Hitler was captured by Allied forces in the middle of World War II? A small group of elite Allied soldiers hides in the dense trees of a German forest. The sound of an engine can be heard in the distance. The Allies received intel that Adolf Hitler would be traveling the secluded road today with only a small entourage of guards. The team was airdropped the previous night and is now waiting to ambush the jeep holding the Führer. The Nazi vehicle crests the hill. There are 4 men in it. Their target sits in the back. The Allied commander gives the signal and the soldiers get ready. As the jeep passes their position, they shoot out the tires. The vehicle swerves out of control and slams into a tree on the side of the road. The Allied soldiers spring out of the foliage and open fire on the men in front of the jeep. Their bullets shatter the windshield and rip through the Nazis in the front seats of the vehicle. The general who sits next to Hitler raises his machine gun and returns fire. The Allied soldiers dive for cover. From one of the treetops, a sniper peers through his scope. He holds his breath and pulls the trigger. The head of the Nazi general explodes as the bullet from his Springfield rifle passes through the German skull. Adolf Hitler scrambles for his pistol. He pulls the Walther P-38 out of its holster. Before he can turn to aim it, a Thompson machine gun is pressed to his skull. "Drop it or you die," the commander of the Allied forces hisses. Hitler lets go of the gun. It falls to the floor of the jeep with a clank. The Allied soldiers drag the Führer from the jeep and gag him. The Special Forces unit carefully makes their way through enemy territory. They must move fast, as it won't be long until the Nazis realize their leader has been kidnapped. The band of soldiers and the prisoner make it to a Nazi Air Force base. It's risky to try to steal a plane while also hauling the most wanted man in the world along with them, but it is the only way out. The men wait for a shift change. When the time's right, they run to one of the Heinkel HE-111 furthest away from the watchtower. The squad piles into the aircraft as they throw Hitler into the cargo hold. The commander uses the butt of his gun to knock the Führer as 2 men scramble into the cockpit. They start the engine and move toward the runway. In confusion, the Nazis try to identify who's taking the plane out for an unauthorized flight. It doesn't even cross their minds that Allied soldiers are the ones stealing the aircraft with Hitler aboard. The plane takes off and the Nazis finally realize something is terribly wrong. They open fire on the stolen Heinkel HE-111, but the Allies are already out of range. They fly across the North Sea and land in Great Britain. Adolf Hitler is put in prison, and the British inform the world that the monster who started World War II has been captured. However, this does not necessarily lead to a happy ending, as Nazi Germany is dominating the war in Europe, and since their leader is now in an Allied prison, someone else must take over the war effort. There are 3 men who could claim the Nazi throne and continue fighting Hitler's war. Unfortunately for the Allies, all 3 of these Nazis might be more competent leaders than Hitler. As it turns out, capturing Hitler is one of the worst things the Allies could have done in the middle of World War II. With the former Führer awaiting trial in Britain, Heinrich Himmler takes over as the leader of Nazi Germany. Himmler already had control over the Schutzstaffel and Gestapo, but now he controls every aspect of the Nazi military. He quickly begins to undo certain missteps that Hitler had taken while he was Führer. Himmler consolidates the Nazi military and reinforces the Eastern Front. Hitler had planned to invade the Soviet Union, but Himmler and many other military leaders see this as a mistake. Himmler uses his command over the SS and uses them as a secondary military force. Although he's hell-bent on carrying out the extermination of the Jewish people like the other Nazi officials, he sees that forces are needed elsewhere. By maintaining a strong defense along the Eastern Front and the English Channel, Himmler's able to keep the Allies to the north at bay. He sends a large force to aid Italy in defeating enemy forces in North Africa, where Hitler failed. Himmler succeeds and secures large amounts of oil and resources for Germany. This allows the Nazis to continue to build up their war machine with much fewer losses than if they'd invaded the Soviet Union. Hitler's capture in the middle of World War II was Germany's best-case scenario. By focusing its forces on one front at a time, the Nazis were able to secure victory in Europe and move on to the next phase of the war. If Himmler didn't rise to power, then Joseph Goebbels might have been the one to weasel his way into controlling the Nazi Party. Hitler had met with Goebbels just before he was captured and saw what the Minister for Public Enlightenment and Propaganda had in store over the coming months. Goebbels' new campaign to recruit more soldiers to the Nazi cause extends beyond Germany and into other countries in Europe. He seeks to unify people using scare tactics and uniting them behind a common enemy, the Jews. Goebbels recruits like-minded individuals from Spain, Portugal, and other European countries, including those who are part of the Allies alliance. He uses radio broadcasts while simultaneously dropping massive amounts of pro-Nazi pamphlets over major cities. His main goal is to keep morale high and a fresh flow of recruits coming to the Nazi ranks. He hands over the military aspect of the war to the others who have more experience and can make better decisions. Through Goebbels' mass propaganda campaign and the tactics of the military generals who are smarter than Hitler, Germany might have been able to increase its numbers and territory while the Führer rots in jail. Hermann Göring was Hitler's closest ally and friend when he rose to power in Germany. After Göring fell out of favor with the Führer over numerous bad military decisions, he started getting illusions of grandeur. He had been the commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe, but with the former Führer out of the picture, Göring is now ready to take over all parts of the military and the Nazi Party as a whole. One of Göring's main obsessions is the final solution. Now that he's in charge of Germany, he ramps up the efforts to wipe out the Jewish people across Europe. It's a worst-case scenario for the Jews, as the new leader of the Nazis is just as hell-bent on genocide as Adolf Hitler was. However, Göring gets distracted easily and becomes more concerned with riches and prestige than actually winning a war. He continues to make bad military decisions and does not listen to his advisors. Others in the Nazi Party become frustrated with Göring and how he's running the country. They assassinate him, and someone else fills the power vacuum in Germany. None of these options would be good news for the rest of the world if Hitler was captured. Each successor had his own quirks, and they may even allow Germany to win the war. The capture of Adolf Hitler by the Allies in the middle of World War II might have actually been a bad thing. Regardless of who took over for Hitler, the fate of the former Führer would have been the same. Adolf Hitler sits in his cell, staring at the stone wall and thinking about where he went wrong. The smell of burning cigars fills the air as Hitler snaps out of his daydream. A gruff cough and the clearing of a throat causes Hitler to turn around. Standing on the other side of the bars is Winston Churchill. He has a look of disgust on his face and fire burning in his eyes. Churchill hates Adolf Hitler, maybe more than anyone else in the entire world. He's seen firsthand the destruction Germany had done to Europe. The bombings of Britain still sit at the forefront of his mind. He's brought with him a loaded pistol and still hasn't decided if he's going to use it or not. Churchill and the other Allied leaders decided that this man should stand trial for his crimes, but deep down Winston Churchill wants to be the one to put a bullet in his chest. The two men stare at each other. Churchill hacks up phlegm and spits on the floor in front of Hitler. This will not be merciful. Your trial will be swift. Your fate is already determined. I'll see you in hell." Churchill turns and leaves Adolf Hitler alone with his thoughts in the damp jail cell. Later that day, he's escorted to the National Courthouse. Adolf Hitler's trial is a short one. He's convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity. He's sentenced to death. Days after he's found guilty, Adolf Hitler is executed. Britain does not make a spectacle of it. His body's loaded on a Royal Navy vessel and carried out to the northern Atlantic. Sailors drop the weighted body into the frigid water. Winston Churchill stands on deck, smoke streaming out of his cigar, as he watches Hitler's body sink into the abyss. Scenario 3. What if Hitler was captured by Allied forces at the beginning of World War II? The Nazi Party has risen to power. Adolf Hitler is now the Führer of Germany, and he has plans to take over the world while committing mass genocide. Britain and France watch in disbelief as German forces launch into Poland. They understand that there is no time to mess around. This new leader of Germany must be stopped at all costs. Britain and France will not stand for the aggressive nature of the new German Führer. They immediately send forces into Poland and push the Nazis back. It's early 1939 and the German military is growing, but not yet strong enough to take on the combined might of France, Great Britain, and the Nordic countries. The Allied forces push the Germans back. They warn Italy that if they get involved, they will not hesitate to move forces into their country. The United States has been keeping a close eye on the situation, and although they initially decided to take an isolationist policy, it's determined that Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany pose too much of a threat to the stability of the world to be left alone. The US decides to aid European Allied forces in their endeavor to stop the mad dictator. With decisive action, Hitler doesn't have time to unify all of Germany behind him. Many of his tanks, aircraft, and naval vessels are still in the middle of being built. The Allied forces secure the borders surrounding Germany to make sure the Nazis can't expand outward. They then move in on all sides toward Berlin. Once the Allies reach the city, they place Adolf Hitler under arrest. There's a puppet government put in place to oversee the restructuring of Germany. Any Nazi sympathizers are quickly rounded up and tried for their unprovoked attack on Poland. As Allied intelligence digs deeper into the infrastructure of the Nazi Party, they uncover a number of alarming discoveries. Adolf Hitler and the Nazis were already starting to round up Jewish families and send them to concentration camps in the region. The Allies can't believe what the Nazis had planned. They immediately begin trying Hitler and others in the Nazi Party for crimes against humanity and sentencing them one by one. Originally, the plan had been to exile the Nazi leadership to a remote island where they could hurt no one but themselves. This would have been similar to how Napoleon was dealt with. But after seeing the genocidal tendencies of the Nazi Party, Allied leaders decide that Adolf Hitler cannot be left alive. He still has supporters across Germany and in other parts of the world. If he ever escaped captivity, he could reclaim his position as Führer of Germany, and the world would descend into chaos. It's decided then that the war crimes committed during the initial invasion of Poland is enough to sentence Adolf Hitler to death. He's hung for almost throwing the entire world into another war. His closest allies are also tried and hung, while many other Nazis are placed in jail for the remainder of their lives. Capturing Hitler at the beginning of World War II would have been a best-case scenario. In order to do so, Britain, France, and the US needed to step up and fight back early on. By cutting off the serpent's head at the beginning of the conflict, Nazi Germany might have been kept under control and eventually dismantled without a world war. After Hitler's capture and execution, the Nazi Party's hold on Germany falls apart. Others try to take Hitler's place, but it's too late. There's been a shift in power, and now outside forces are influencing the restructuring of the German government. Pro-democracy candidates are put into office, and Germany starts to look much more like France and Britain than its former dictatorship. This would have been the ideal outcome if Adolf Hitler was captured during World War II. The earlier he was put behind bars and tried for his crimes, the less damage he could do to Europe and the rest of the world. There may have been repercussions to his capture if the rest of the Nazi Party was not dealt with at the same time as the Führer. But if Hitler had been stopped in 1939, millions of lives could have been saved. That being said, there's no telling what would have happened if the Nazis had been stopped early on. Perhaps the Soviet Union would have amassed a huge army and invaded Europe. Or maybe an even worse dictator would have arisen in another country. The only thing we can be sure of is that if Adolf Hitler had been captured, he would have been put on trial and most likely executed. Now watch Last 24 Hours of Hitler's Life, or check out Hitler's Plans for the World if you won.